Hi, my name is Bart Weyand, and I'm going to read you a chapter from a story, a chapter from a book called Notes from a Small Island by Bill Bryson. It was written in 1995. Bryson lived in the UK, in England, and he met his wife in 1973 on a trip to England, and lived there for 20 years. And these are some notes that he wrote, a book that he wrote, and some notes on his ideas of Britain. And he's an Anglophile, very strong Anglophile, that are quite humorous and show a side of England that a lot of people might not know, a humorous side. So it's a funny story. I like to choose Bill Bryson because similarly, I also met my wife in 1973 in England. I didn't live there. I lived there for 7 years, but we came back in 1986. Bryson has written many books, travel memoirs, and also the Life and Times of the Thunderbolt Kid and things like that, and books like that. They're very funny. So Bryson now lives in New Hampshire. With his wife and 4 kids, and has stopped writing, actually, that's from what I've heard. Anyway, this is a little story on a town called Weston-super-Mare, which is in the west coast of England, south of Bristol, southeast west of Bristol. Anyway, here I go. It's called, as I say, Notes from a Small Island. The way I see it, there are 3 reasons never to be unhappy. First, you were born. There is in itself a remarkable achievement. This in itself is a remarkable achievement. Did you know that each time your father ejaculated, and frankly he did it quite a lot, he produced roughly 25 million spermatozoa, enough to repopulate Britain every 2 years or so. For you to have been born, not only did you have to be among the few batches of sperm that had even a theoretical chance of prospering, in itself quite a long shot. But then you had to win a race against 24,999,999 or so other wriggling contenders, all rushing to swim the English Channel of your mother's vagina in order to be the first ashore at the fertile egg of Bologna, as it were. Being born was easily the most remarkable achievement of your whole life. And think, you could just as easily have been a flatworm. Second, you are alive. For the tiniest moment in the span of eternity, you have the miraculous privilege to exist. For endless eons, you did not. Soon, you will cease to be once more. That you are able to sit here right now in this one never-to-be-repeated moment, reading this book, eating bonbons, dreaming about hot sex with that scrumptious person from accounts, speculatively sniffing your armpits, doing whatever you are doing, just existing, is really wondrous beyond belief. Third, you have plenty to eat. You live in a time of peace, and tie a yellow ribbon round the old oak tree will never be number 1 again. If you bear these things in mind, you will never be truly unhappy. Though in fairness, I must point out that if you find yourself alone in Weston-super-Mare on a rainy Tuesday evening, you may come close. It was only a little after 6 when I stepped from the Exeter train and ventured into the town. But already the whole of Weston appeared to be indoors beyond drawn curtains. The streets were empty, dark, and full of slanting rain. I walked from the station through a concrete shopping precinct and out onto the blustery seafront. Most of the hotels along the front were dark and evidently shut for the winter, and the few that were open didn't look particularly enticing. I walked a mile or so to a cluster of 3 brightly lit establishments at the far end of the promenade and randomly selected a place called the Birchfield. It was fairly basic, but clean and reasonably priced. You could do worse, and I have. I gave myself a cursory grooming and wandered back into town in search of dinner and diversion. I had an odd sense that I had been here before, which patently I had not. My only acquaintance with Weston was that John Cleese had once told me, I'm not really dropping names, I was interviewing him for a newspaper article, he's a jolly nice fellow, by the way, that he and his parents had lived in a flat in Weston, and that when they moved out, Jeffrey Archer and his parents moved in. The idea of these two boys in short trousers saying hello, and then one of them going on to greatness. What made Weston feel familiar was, of course, that it was just like everywhere else. It had Boots and Marks and Spencer and Dixon's and W.H. Smith and all the rest of it. I realized with a kind of dull ache that there wasn't a single thing here that I hadn't seen a million times already. I went into a pub called the Britannia Inn, which was unfriendly without being actually hostile, and had a couple of lonely pints. Then ate at a Chinese restaurant, not because I craved Chinese, but because it was the only place I could find open. I was the only customer. As I quietly scattered rice and sweet and sour sauce across the tablecloth, there were some rumbles of thunder, and, a moment later, the heavens opened. And I mean opened. I have seldom seen it rain so hard in England. The rain clattered onto the street like a shower of ball bearings, and within minutes the restaurant window was wholly obscured with water, as if someone were running a hose over it. Because I was a long walk from my hotel, I spun out the meal, hoping the weather would ease off. But it didn't, and eventually I had no choice but to step out into the rainy night. I stood beneath the shop awning next door and wondered what to do. Rain battered madly on the awning and rushed in torrents through the gutters. All along the road it poured over the sides of overstretched gutters and fell to the pavement in an endless staccato beat. With my eyes closed, it sounded like I was in the midst of some vast, insane tap-dancing competition. Pulling my jacket above my head, I waded out into the deluge, then sprinted across the street and impulsively took refuge in the first bright open thing I came to, an amusement arcade. Wiping my glasses with a bandana, I took my bearings. The arcade was a large room full of brightly pulsating machines, some of them playing electronic tunes and making unbidden kaboom noises, but apart from an overseer sitting at a counter with a drooping cigarette and a magazine, there was no one in the place. So it looked eerily as if the machines were playing themselves. With the exception of those crane things that give you 3 milliseconds to try to snatch a stuffed animal with a grabber bucket, and in which the controls don't actually correspond to the movement of the crane, I don't understand arcade games at all. Generally, I can't even figure out where to insert the money, or, once it's inserted, how to make the game start. If by some miracle I manage to surmount these 2 obstacles, I invariably fail to recognize that the game has come to life and that I am wasting precious seconds feeling in remote coin slot returns and searching for a button that says start. Then I have 30 confused seconds of being immersed in some frantic mayhem without having the faintest idea what's going on, while my children shout, "You've just blown up Princess Leia, you stupid shit," and then it says, "Game over." This is more or less what happened to me now. For no reason that I can possibly attach a rational explanation to, I put 50 pence into a game called Killer Kickspocker, or Kick Your Fucking Brains Out, or something like that, and spent about a minute punching a red button and wagging a joystick with my character, a muscular blonde fellow, kicked uselessly at drapes and threw magic discs into the air, while a series of equally muscular but unscrupulous Orientals assaulted him with kidney chops and flung him repeatedly to the carpet. I had a strange hour in which I wandered in a kind of trance, feeding money into machines and playing games I couldn't follow. I drove racing cars in the hay bales and obliterated friendly troops with lasers, and unwittingly helped zombie mutants do unspeakable things to a child. Eventually, I ran out of money and stepped out into the night. I had just a moment to note that the rain had eased a little and that the street was flooded, evidently from a clogged drain, when a red Ford Fiesta sped through the puddle at great speed and unusually close to the curb, transferring nearly all of the water from the puddle and onto me. As I stood there splattering and gasping, the car slowed. 3 close-cropped heads popped out the windows and shouted some happy greeting along the lines of "nya, nya, nya, nya," and it sped off. Glumly, I trudged back along the prom, squelching with each step and shivering with cold. I don't wish to reduce this cheery chronicle to pathos, but I had only recently recovered from a fairly serious bout of pneumonia. I won't say that I nearly died, but I was ill enough to watch daytime television, and I certainly don't want to be in that condition again. To add to my indignity, the Fiesta came past on a victory lap, and its pleasure-starved occupants slowed to offer me another triumphal "nya, nya" before speeding off into the night with a screech and brief, uncontrolled fishtail slide that unfortunately failed to bury them in a lamppost. By the time I reached my distant hotel, I was feeling thoroughly chilled and wretched. So imagine my consternation, if you will, when I discovered that the reception area was in semi-darkness and the door was locked. I looked at my watch. It was only 9 o'clock, for God's sake. What kind of town was this? There were 2 doorbells, and I tried them both without response. I tried my room key in the door, and of course it didn't work. I tried the bells again, leaning on them both for many minutes and growing increasingly angry. When this elicited no satisfaction, I banged on the glass door with the flat of my hand, then with a fist, and finally with a stout boot and a touch of frenzy. I believe, on reflection, I may also have filled the quiet streets with shouting. Eventually, the proprietor appeared at the top of some basement stairs, looking surprised. "I'm so sorry, sir," he said mildly as he let me in. "Have you been out there long?" Well, I blushed to think at how I ranted at the poor man. I used immoderate language. I accused him and his fellow townspeople of appalling shortages of intelligence and charm. I told him that I had just passed the dreariest evening of my life in this godforsaken hellhole of a resort, that I had been soaked to the skin by a carful of young men who, between them, were 10 points short of a moron, that I had walked a mile in wet clothes and had now spent nearly half an hour shivering in the cold because I had been locked out of my own hotel room at 9 o'clock in the bloody evening. "May I remind you," I went on in a shrill voice, "that 2 hours ago you said goodbye to me, watched me go out the door and disappear down the street. Did you think I wasn't coming back? That I would sleep in a park and return for my things in the morning? Or is it merely that you are a total imbecile? Please tell me, because I would very much like to know." The proprietor flinchingly soaked up my abuse and responded with fluttering hands and a flood of apologies. He offered me a tray of tea and sandwiches, to dry and press my wet clothes, to escort me to my room and turn on my radiator personally. He did everything but fall to my feet and beg me to run him through with a saber. He positively implored me to let him bring me something warming on a tray. "I don't want anything but to go to my room and count the minutes until I get out of this fucking dump," I shouted, perhaps a trifle theatrically, but to good effect, and stalked up the stairs to the second floor, where I plodded about heatedly in the corridor for some minutes, and realized that I didn't have the faintest idea which was my room. There was no number on the key. I returned to the reception area, now once more in semi-darkness, and put my head by the basement door. "Excuse me," I said in a small voice. "Could you please tell me what room I'm in?" "Number 27, sir," came a voice from the darkness. I stood for some time without moving. Thank you, I said. It's quite all right, sir, came the voice. Have a good night. I frowned and cleared my throat. Thank you, I said again, and retired to my room, where the night passed without further incident. In the morning, I presented myself in the sunny dining room, and as I had feared, the proprietor was waiting to receive me. Now that I was dry and warm and well-rested, I felt terrible about my outburst of the night before. Good morning, sir, he said brightly as if nothing had happened, and showed me to a window table with a nice view of the sea. Sleep all right, did you? I was taken aback by his friendliness. Yes, I did, as a matter of fact. Good, splendid. Juice and cereal on the trolley. Please help yourself. Can I get you a full English breakfast, sir? I found this unmerited bonhomie unbearable. I tucked my chin into my chest and, in a furtive grumble, said, Look here, I'm very sorry for what I said last night. I was in a bit of a temper. It's quite all right, sir. No, really, I'm very sorry. Bit ashamed, in fact. Consider it forgotten, sir. So, full English breakfast, is it? Yes, please. Very good, sir. I've never had such good or friendly service anywhere, or felt more like a worm. He brought me food promptly, chattering away about the weather and what a glorious day it promised to be. I couldn't understand why he was so forgiving. Only gradually did it occur to me what a strange sight I must have presented. A middle-aged man with a rucksack, visiting a place like Weston on Supermare, out of season, for no evident reason, fetching up his hotel and bellowing and stomping over a trifling inconvenience. He must have thought I was mad, an escaped lunatic perhaps, and that this was the safest way to approach me. Either that, or he was just an extremely nice person. In either case, I salute him. Weston was surprisingly lovely in the morning sunshine. Out in bay, an island called Flat Holm basked in the clear, clean air, and beyond it rose the green hills of Wales, 12 miles or so across the water. Even the hotels that I had disdained the night before didn't look half bad. I walked to the station and took a train to Chepstow and a bus on to Monmouth through the famous Wye Valley. The valley was as beautiful as I remembered it from years before. Dark woods, winding river, lonely white farmhouses high up on steep slopes. But the villages between were rather astonishingly charmless and seemed to consist mostly of gas stations, pubs with vast parking lots, and gift shops. I watched out for Tintern Abbey, made famous, of course, by the well-known Wordsworth poem, I Can Be Boring Outside the Lake District Too, and was disappointed to find that it didn't stand out in the country, as I had recalled, but on the edge of an unmemorable village. Monmouth, however, seemed to be fine, a handsome town with a sloping high street and an imposing town hall. In front of it stood a statue of Charles Stuart Rolls, son of Lord and Lady Clankatok, pioneer of ballooning, motoring, and aviation, who died in a crash at Bournemouth in July 1910, according to the inscription. He was shown holding a model of an early biplane, which made him look rather like King Kong swatting away attacking craft. There was no indication of what his local connection might be. The Monmouth bookshop on Church Street had a book of mine in the window, and so, of course, gets a mention here. I had it in mind to do another little walk while the weather was fine, so I didn't linger. I bought a pasty in a baker's and ate it as I found my way to the Wye. I picked up a riverside path by the town's handsome stone bridge and followed it north along the Welsh bank. For the first 40 minutes, I was accompanied by a ceaseless roar of traffic on the A40, but at a place called Goldsmith's Wood, the river bent sharply away from the road, and I was suddenly in another, infinitely more tranquil world. Birds fussed and twittered in the trees above, and small unseen creatures plinked into the water at my approach. The river, sparkling and languid and framed by hills of autumn-colored trees, was very beautiful, and I had it all to myself. A mile or two farther on, I paused to study the map and noticed a spot on a nearby hill called King Arthur's Cave. Well, I couldn't pass that up, so I lumbered keenly up the hill and poked around among likely spots, pausing from time to consult the map and scratch my head. After about an hour of clambering over boulders and fallen trees, and to my mild astonishment, I actually found the cave. It wasn't much, just a shallow chamber hewn by nature from a limestone cliff face, but I had a pleasing sense of being its first visitor in years. At any rate, there were none of the usual signs of recent visitation, graffiti and abandoned beer cans, which make it unique in Britain, if not the world. Because time was getting on, I decided to take a shortcut through the hilly woods, but I neglected to note that I was at the uppermost of a very tight band of contour lines. In consequence, I found myself a moment later descending a more or less perpendicular hill in an entirely involuntary fashion, bounding through the woods with great leaps and outflung arms in a manner oddly reminiscent of George Chakiris and West Side Story. Except, of course, this was Wales, and George Chakiris didn't shit himself with terror before eventually, after several bouncing somersaults and an epical 80-yard slide on the stomach, ending up on the very lip of a giddy precipice with a goggle-eyed view of the glittery Y 100 feet below. I cast my gaze back along my suddenly motionless body to find that my left foot had fortuitously snagged a sapling. Had the sapling not been there, I would not be here. Muttering, "Thank you, Lord," I hauled myself to my feet, dusted twigs and leaf mold from my front, and clambered laboriously back up the hill to the path I had so intemperately forsaken. By the time I reached the riverbank, another hour had gone. It took another hour or so to hike onto Simmons' Yacht, a spacious wooded bluff and well-known beauty spot at the top of a formidable hill with long views in many directions. It was exceedingly fetching, a hang glider's vista over the meandering river and a flawless Arcadian landscape of undulant fields and clustered woodlands stretching off to the distant Black Mountains. "Not bad," I said, "not bad at all," and wondered if there was anywhere nearby where I could get a cup of tea and possibly change my pants. The end.